So today's conversation is about making a business case for the design system. That's not just the design system, that's the entire design system ecosystem, if you will. But why have a design system in the first place? Why does the business need one? Why is it important to deliver that value, not just to the business, but also to that customer, to that end user? And that's really where our focus is going to be throughout today. We are doing in-person events as well. For those of you who happen to be in these cities, we're going to be in Seattle this month, at the end of this month, actually next week, in Boston, where I happen to live. We are hosting an event on June 18th. And we are also going to be in Portland in July. There will be other events. There's a link at the bottom. You can see knapsack.cloud/events to see where you can sign up for the design systems leadership events. And also, did I drop a card? Okay. We're also hosting a bunch of webinars. I don't know why I'm missing that one, but there are a bunch of webinars that we're going to be running as well. So check out the events link, and yeah, we can go from there. Laura, you raised your hand. Do you have a question? You can pop questions in the Q&A section. I should be able to see that. Kim, will you also just notify me if there's questions that I can't see? For some reason, I can't see all of the little windows that are here. There's so many of them. Cool. Nick, I'm not going to do a formal introduction, but I do want to tell everybody that you are one of those people who's done everything and touched everything on a design system. Like I said at the beginning, you've been on both, or just about all the sides of the table. If there was a multi-sided table, Nick has been, he's been under the table, he's been on top of the table, he's been all over the place.
The party's alive.
And that's why, yeah, that's why I've invited him to join us today, is because I have an agency background, also then joined InVision, where I met Nick. And that's where we were selling DSM to enterprise customers. And then Nick went on to Meta and has done some wonderful other things. I've also been in the SaaS world and like I said, in the agency world. So we've sat around and in on top of the table. And so hopefully if you've got questions, and we should be able to advance the conversation around the things that are important to you. Big topics that we're going to talk about today is what should we measure? Because if you're going to talk about value, you need to talk about what you're connecting that value to, what are you hooking it to. What should you measure that matters? At what stage in your design system, or what stage in your business, or where you are in the process that measure is probably going to change. How design systems fit into the bigger picture of product ops or product operations, and how that kind of extends towards product as a big word. And then, of course, we are going to have a competitive conversation about, like, why do you need this? Why does this give you an advantage? Why does this make it better than it not having one? And how can you then have that conversation about that competitive advantage that you can then convey to your superiors or to the people that are in decision-making powers, writing checks and saying, look, this is a design system, gives us an edge over everybody else. We should be doing this. So Nick, let's start with measures. There's a law, Goodhart's law, that comes to mind when I think of this. And that is, when a measure becomes the target, it ceases to be a good measure. Yeah. And that just rings so true to me. Like, once you pick the thing to measure, it starts to immediately degrade in value. So yeah. Let's talk about measures. Where do you start the conversation when it comes to measures and metrics?
Well, thanks for the kind intro. There's a lot to that, and also having a background in the agency and consulting space, it's been nice to see the trends over time, even outside of just design systems, on how do we measure success, especially like just the evolving design industry over the last 25 or 30 years. It's been a similar conversation. We're just in that next phase of, like, now we're really operationalizing it. Now we're really intersecting with the whole production pipeline and, like, tying it all together with design systems. So measuring value has become even more important. I think there's a version of this from the agency world where you can kind of get away with the client likes it, success. And, I've been a part of a lot of those campaigns. It doesn't work so well in the design system world, where we're much more tied into operations, much more tied into delivery. It's really context. it's the audience, it's the occasion, it's what stage are you at in the design system?
Mm.
Do you have an integrated design into development pipeline? Is the culture collaborative? I think I start with just a lot of those questions. And depending on those answers, you can measure a lot of different things. And take like a startup who's just trying to acquire customers or just trying to build their first draft of their product. The measure is
Mhm.
radically different the first 12 months than it is the second 12 months and
Right.
beyond. And so knowing where you're at is probably the biggest hurdle. And it's funny I say that because now I'm at Bill, or formerly Bill.com, where I actually I didn't even know this until this morning. Today's my 1 year anniversary of
Oh,
VR
congrats.
anniversary.
Yeah.
So I
Happy
got pinged
anniversary.
on Slack, and it was like, oh yeah, it's been a year. So I've recently, in the last few months, become the product manager on the team. And so measurement's my jam now. I mean, I've always been thinking about it. But for the first few months, a lot of the work I did here was largely just assessing where we're at, where we've come from,
Mm.
well before we were deciding where to go. And so that's a big piece, I think. A lot of folks talk about, let's measure adoption, some form of adoption, which has, several hundred meetings, depending on who you talk to, is a typical one folks go to. But a lot of people haven't figured out the full impact or full status of where they're at when it comes to
Well, let me
components.
let me
It's
let me
important.
stop you there because it sounds like for those folks that are listening and are trying to figure
Mhm.
out what is the first thing to do. So
Yeah.
they're early stage in this process. Either they're a startup or they're a big organization, they're an enterprise, and they're trying to adopt a design system. Is adoption even worth it? Is it something that should be considered, or is it just a red herring?
Uh, I think it is worth it in some circumstances. I don't think it should be the primary metric of success.
Mm.
And I also have used the term adoption in several different design system initiatives to mean different things.
Mm.
And so I would say earlier maturity adoption, typically for me would mean our teams using it. Are teams actively engaged in consuming it? Do they trust it?
Mm.
Later stage and more mature, I say more integrated with engineering, are the components we're creating ending up in end customer, UIs. You can, systematically measure that versus, more like surveys and other types of metrics where you're checking to see are people actually using it. So they're
Mm.
both valuable, but they're not the, like NPS was for a long time. It's not the only source of success you should be tracking.
Yeah. So adoption sounds like something you'd want to at least include in the beginning, just to make sure that the people are using it. When we
Mhm.
last met with Dan Moore at one of the events that we ran in New York City, he said one of the things that he had noticed is that all of his clients that were in a mature phase of using the design systems had a very high level of adoption. So adoption was no longer really valuable to measure, right? It's like,
Yeah,
well, everybody's using it now. It's now a case of, well, how is it being used? Like,
yeah,
what's the outcome of this usage?
yeah,
Because it's like, a stadium full of people, are they actually engaged with why they're there, or are
yeah,
they just sitting quietly and not doing anything? And I think
yeah,
that's a key thing to express here, is that where you are in the cycle or the arc is going to depend on what you measure, and also how you're going to measure that. What's the quality of that measure?
yeah,
So let's then talk about. So you've gone beyond adoption. You've seen that what you're trying to do is important.
yeah.
How then do you say, okay, well, what does actually matter? Is it the cycle times? Is it the
Uh,
component usage? How detailed do we need to be, or do we start becoming navel gazers and start measuring things that kind of are somewhat pointless, except to maybe the
yeah,
design
let's
system
let's get to
management?
cycle times in a minute. Before we fully move off of or transition from adoption, I think things like adoption tend to be lagging indicators. You're just seeing how many people have used it. I really love tracking trust. Um,
Mm.
And if we can track, do people trust us as a team? Do the engineers and designers that are going to be consuming the design system or already are, do they trust what we're putting out? Do they trust our roadmaps? Do they trust the quality of our output? It almost adoption becomes slightly or maybe significantly less relevant because we could put out two components in our entire system, and if everyone trusts us inherently and that those components add significant value, I'd say we'd have a really great design system. And
Yeah.
I
how do
think
you
that's
measure
where,
trust? What do you do? Are you doing, are these
yeah.
qualitative interviews? How are you
Yeah,
doing it?
right now we're doing qualitative and I think the classic kind of surveys that have gone out. We actually just got done running one as a baseline measure here. And we're measuring our customer satisfaction score based on that. And we've never had that kind of score and metric before. And I think when we brought that to senior leaders, they're like, wow, I kind of heard little rumblings of maybe people not liking parts of this or not, they don't quite using the word trust, but essentially there's parts of what we've done in the past that haven't driven a lot of trust because it's been a little bit of the ivory tower situation. We'll build it and you'll use it.
Mhm.
And changing that dialogue and trying to build trust, I think is a foundational piece to people wanting to use what we build, and making it feel like it's not what we build, but the collective we are building together. And that
Yeah.
transition, I think, is a much more intense cultural change.
So for those of you who are thinking how to create headlights versus taillights, in other
Mhm.
words, leading
Mhm.
indicators versus trailing indicators, this is a really good place to start.
Yeah.
Highly recommend a North Star metric exercise if you haven't done that. Really, what a North Star metric exercise does is allows you to place your attention on what it is that the company will gain from if this thing is used. In other words, if we do these things, then that will be the outcome. So the North Star metric is really a leading non-vanity, not sorry, non-vanity metric,
Yes.
right? So this is not like numbers of users or number of components or something like this. This is level of trust that would be the outcome, or cycle times or any of those things. And then trailing indicators would be represented by things like adoption or maybe any of those other numbers.
Right.
What's really important with a North Star metric and the exercise that you go through in order to get there is to identify what the inputs are. So what are the things that you need to do to influence what that headlight is going to look like?
Yeah.
And that exercise is something that a team will need to do either before they start or during the work of actually setting up a design system so that they can represent what's best for that organization. Not all organizations are going to have the same metric. Did you ever do something like that, or did you do?
Yeah.
Was trust the outcome?
Yeah. So actually, here at Bill, the first 6 months was essentially evaluating where we're at and building that vision, and really not only understanding where we're at as a full system, but elevating that information to all of our the folks that are using our design system, but even more importantly, our executives who are paying for this whole initiative,
Mm-hmm.
helping them understand where we're at was such a huge critical piece, because one of the big things we're looking to do right now is not only build a co-ownership and update a governance model, but modernize our visual design and UX design, and up level like our technology, the parts of the system that our engineers are going to be using.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those pieces were kind of in flight in hit or miss ways, but the cohesive, having those three kind of North Star statements that everyone understands, and then anytime we're like, oh, we should go fix this component or put this fire out, we reflect back on those and make sure that it aligns to those. That's something that we didn't have when I joined, and so that piece took almost 6 months to kind of validate and shop around and get the executive support.
Mm.
And now
And
we're measuring.
was it you doing the shopping around? Like, who was doing the active work of going to get that?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my part of my onboarding roadshow and getting to know folks. And yeah, I think I just brought my consulting hat. I mean, we, like you said, we met at Envision. And in that time, I got to interact
Yeah.
with a ton of large banks and institutions and seeing a lot of the same patterns. So joining Bill, who's a little bit smaller, we're still enterprise size, but I was at IBM for a while, so not quite 300,000 people here, but getting a baseline of where we're at and then educating folks. Also, not only just educating folks on where we are at as a company, but also where's the industry at and where things are going. And I think I love this conversation around adoption, because that's the metric that everyone's been talking about for a couple of years. And I think we're finally cracking that open and saying, is that
Yeah.
really the thing we should be doing? And
Yeah.
we're
For sure.
actively having that conversation internally at right now.
Good.
Yeah.
So I just want to raise everybody's attention to the fact that I can't actually see the Q&A window right now for some reason. The way that my desktop is set up, it's not visible to me. Can you please post your questions in the chat? And I'll also like to invite you to post metrics or measures that you are using right now or you think are useful in the chat, so that Nick and I can reflect on that and see if that we've had any experience in that, or if you've got questions associated with that.
Can I
I
toss
want
out
to,
an interest just on that note? Sorry, Richard. I
yeah.
think there's an interesting metric that we've discovered that I didn't think would be a metric we're tracking, but it's one of those moments in time metrics that will go away. We're actively reducing the number of components we have. We're merging multiple systems together, and we're going from over 200 some odd components, and we're trying to pare that down to a manageable number. And I think we have something like 18,000 tokens. And so our metrics are going, how do we minimize and condense and just get rid of the redundancies, which is not been part of any design system effort I've been part of before, which is typically how do we build more and how do we launch more? And so again, it's not about what's the right metric that works for everybody. It's the metric that works to move your team to achieve some of those North Stars.
Yeah, I think this is actually quite an interesting point, because we do live in a time, and I'm talking about like the macro elements of growth and venture funded startups, and really just the kind of the insanity of grow, where additive very often gets a lot more oxygen than, say, a subtractive approach, right? If you came in and said, we need to take things away, we need to reduce the complexity here, we need to consolidate, that always is going to be an interesting conversation, because a lot of people's jobs are connected to maintaining certain things, whether it's a process or a product or a platform, or just an idea or a vision. You're coming along and saying, hey, all those things that you carefully built with good intention, we want to take some of that stuff away. We don't actually need all of these things. I want to understand, like, how do you go through that part of the conversation? Because it's so much easier to say more, grow. It's much more difficult to say actually less is more. Actually, probably not more difficult to say it, far more difficult to enact it, I should say.
Enacting. Yeah, it was actually really easy when we said, here's where our status is, we should reduce them. Everyone's like, oh yeah, let's get rid of all the redundant. I mean, I just kept using like Marie Kondo, and I was saying, hey, it's like we have 3 or 4 different houses that we have, and we got to move into one big house together. We don't need 17 sets of silverware and like 7 couches. So maybe we can reduce some of those and pick the best ones and whatnot. And that analogy went really far and continues to support that. But yeah, that part's worked. I think the act of doing it in depth, I think to that point, this is a classic. This is not even a design system thing. It's just deprecating stuff. It's such a pain, right? And like getting people to let go of stuff over time. But that's change management. That's migration plans. I mean, we're in the phase of really ideating the future, redesigning a lot of components. And the question that we get most is, well, how are we possibly going to move to all this stuff? And it's like, well, that's a valid question, but the anxiety of not knowing when that change is going to happen is almost always some sort of limiter. And so we're actively putting plans together for that. But I think as a tip to folks, be ready for those questions, because people immediately go to like, when are we moving and when are we downgrade or when are we upgrading? It can really spike tensions there.
I've got an interesting question for you, and then I want to go back in time as well. I think what I've noticed, and I want to know whether it's true of you as well, is that when I've taken on transformation roles, so when I was at Envision, my job was VP of transformation, and our team, we had a transformation team, we had to go to all the Fortune 500 companies that Envision delivered product to and help them transform, help them do design or product transformation. And the thing that we found worked really well was to meet individually, kind of one-on-one or small groups, to get everybody's voice heard. In other words, what are you worried about? What are you scared of? What are you worried about giving up? What are you worried about this change in acting, or how will that affect your job, your career, etc.? Then once we had done that, then we could do a much larger announcement saying, hey, this is what's going to happen. What didn't work well was, hey, big change is coming. Good luck with that. Let us know if you've got any questions. So what's your experience been?
100% that, like, go and meet a ton of people. And it feels a little bit like a political campaign. And as my role as a design leader in the space for a long time, I always felt like we were leading the way on the design side for a lot of this kind of messaging piece. And it's been really
Mm,
gratifying to now be in the product management space where it actually is my job as opposed to me just pretending
mm,
to be a product manager. And so it's been really useful to spend that time with folks, learn what their needs are and their concerns, so that when we do put messaging out, it's addressing those points. And it's directly touching on what they might think is going to be the problem. And honestly, just that the edict of like there should be no surprises. And when things are going to be announced, if it's going to affect people's worlds, make sure it's happening with them and not to them. I'm
yeah,
just such a huge proponent of building co-creation models and and collaborating on these things before we decide what's going to happen, and
yeah.
setting up like governance structures that enable those voices to continually be heard over and over again. It does oftentimes feel like I'm setting up little baby governments every time I get into design system projects. Yeah,
You're now, if anybody's looking for a new lobbyist, Nick
there you go.
is ready for that job. Um,
Next phase.
okay, so I want to go back in time a little bit here in the sense that if somebody's trying to make a case for a design system, so a design system may or may not exist in their organization,
Hmm.
or a version of a design system may exist. Maybe they've got what can only be, generously be called a UI kit.
Sure.
Let's just say that. And they've seen the future. They know that design systems are ultimately going to be the reason that they are able to deliver the value that they're looking for. Where do they start that conversation? How do you get the case made for a design system? Why invest in it? Why get the necessary pieces of the puzzle, including the resources,
Yeah.
the platform, the products involved? Where do you start?
Well, I've got a quick story for that. So, and how I encountered this, really my intro into design systems was back at IBM in 2016 or so. Most of the folks that have in the design system world have heard of Carbon, Carbon Design System. I managed the IBM Cloud design team, and we were the largest consumers of Carbon. But at that point, Carbon was largely a design kit for us. It
Mm-hmm.
had an engineering components, but it wasn't really a system. There wasn't a clear governance model. There wasn't contribution. IBM Cloud we had 400 designers and thousands of engineers all trying to use Carbon, but it was like trying to build pieces that didn't all fit together. So we essentially built a new sub design system team under it within our organization, and we had to build the case for that. And so the case was made by going around and showing what happens when we build UIs without that kind of structure
Mm.
that was needed. And we took the top user journeys for IBM Cloud. Literally, this was before COVID when we're all in the office together. Literally printed out the UIs and mapped them across like a giant wall. And every time anybody that had a manager title or above came to our floor, we're like, check out our IBM Cloud experience, and walked them through it. And they go, this is terrible. It's totally broken. Nothing makes sense from one screen to another. And we're like, yeah. And they say, what do you mean? What do we need to do to fix it? And we said, we didn't say it at the time. We didn't know it was called a governance team, but essentially we created a new 10, 12 person design system team that lived on IBM Cloud over the course of a couple of years. But it was just tying it back to what are the primary user journeys? How is that broken?
Right.
And showing how we're not being efficient or not being able to even meet basic accessibility needs or compliance stuff. I mean, Bill's a financial company, and we did a lot of stuff on the finance side on IBM and governments, right? Like it was really hard to be compliant on a lot of things for each team doing it
Right.
independently. We can do a lot of that, wholesale through the design system. So, yeah, it wasn't even a hardcore numbers game. It was just getting our executives to see how disparate and how broken it was across
Right.
the journeys. Yeah.
So this is what we used to call a hurt and rescue type of pitch, where you show all the pain, you show the frustrations, you show the potential, as you say, whether it's IP, regulation, compliance, you can show all of the things that are really meaningful to an executive. You say,
Yeah.
look, bad things are going to happen. We could get sued. Bad things are
Yeah.
going to happen. Customers are going to get hurt. Bad things are going to happen. We're going to lose money. And then they are almost ready to hear your stories. But if you start with, hey, design system's great, we should invest, $1 million in this, they're going to go, there's no way, right? You got to show
Right.
the hurt before you show the rescue.
And the carrot, like that was the hurt is the stick side, but the carrot side, we had two teams that physically sat about 30 feet from each other, both building kind of cart style, like checkout
Mm-hmm.
experiences for purchasing servers and such online. The
Mm-hmm.
experience looked fairly similar. It used all the same Carbon components, but the way it was stitched together to create that journey was radically different. And one had a very robust research team, and they were able to show how much higher a conversion rate was. I mean, it was on the order of magnitude
Mm,
higher of one team versus the other. The team that didn't have it was tied to the largest acquisition IBM ever had. And the team that did have it was kind of the older technology team. And so it was really clear when you go to the product management leadership and you're like, hey, you want to convert people to actually buy stuff once it's in their cart? How about we have a system that standardizes that and then all the teams get access to it? And that was a really
got it.
easy case to make.
So now we've talked about really big companies. IBM's huge. Bill is huge. What about the companies that you worked with? I think especially with DSM, right,
Yeah,
where they weren't the biggest. I mean, a lot of them were. A lot of them were Fortune 500 companies, but then a
sure.
lot of them were just implementing small scale design
Mhm.
systems, or really just like something just out of the gate. So tell us about like early stage or small scale design systems, making a case for that.
Yeah, I think you probably don't even need, in a lot of cases, you don't need to make a big pitch on getting a lot more resources. I think it's more about getting cycle time for engineers and designers to have heads down time on, hey, we're going to
Mm,
build this big new table, or one team's going to build a new, data table for their part of the product. Can we systematize that? Can we take that and make it so it's not just totally custom to their needs, but make it so that the three other teams that have data tables could also use it? And that comes
yeah,
back down, come to that like co-creation model where a lot of it is recognizing that multiple teams are going to build similar stuff. And even if it's a small, let's say it's a, 100-person company or smaller, you're still going to have multiple designers and multiple engineers in their own little tiny silos. I think a large part of leading design systems is just bringing those people together and recognizing the
yes.
patterns across those and going, you two are working on the same kind of thing. Let's get you together and build it together and make sure that we're documenting it so that someone else can use it later. And then that becomes the new component for that thing. I don't think it needs to be a big pitch and asking for a lot more money.
Yeah, so this is actually a really good point because there's two elements here. One is I think design systems are a little bit like a Trojan horse in the sense that
Mhm.
they are a good way to bring people together to have conversations.
Correct.
Now, I don't think what you're advocating for is a consensus necessarily, but you're definitely advocating for collaboration and conversation.
Yep.
Not everybody's going to get what they want.
Right.
Everybody, there's going to have to be some compromise, but it is an opportunity to start aligning teams around the bigger picture, and that's one of the topics we want to talk about today, which is
Yeah.
product operations has to include all those cross-functional teams and
Yeah.
cross-functional members. And one of the things that we noticed, especially when you and I were in Vision, is that we were often called in to solve transformation problems. And we would get groups together. We'd have designers, engineers, or developers and product people getting together from a company. We won't name names, but let's say, it
Sure.
was a big brand. And they'd all get in the room together, and it would be the first time
Yes.
that those cross-functional people had ever got together. Now,
Yeah.
we were surprised because we were facilitating a conversation thinking that these people were genuinely working cross-functionally. At least that's what their leadership had told us. Like, hey, look, we've got cross-functional teams. They're they're often collaborating on projects. But when we got them together, they were introducing themselves to each other as if they had never met each other.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
design systems are this Trojan horse for conversation. And
Yeah.
it's a really nice way to begin those kinds of connective tissue moments between teams saying, hey, look, we can all benefit from this thing.
Yep.
There's an object here that we can rally around and get excited about. It has benefits for engineering, probably more than anybody, even though it's called a design system.
Yeah.
It really isn't, it's not about design. It's about
Yeah.
product, shipping value. So it really
Yep.
is a good thing. So give us a little anecdote as to what you've seen, how you've seen teams come together around design systems, and why that should be considered as part of the business value that you're pitching.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing point. I pretty quickly moved away from the philosophy of like, if we build a bunch of components, people are just going to show up and use them. I've never seen that work. And I've largely pushed or moved my efforts in the last 7 years into bringing people together, finding out what gaps the teams have in other communications or process, And I guess I found myself in like more of the design ops or just product ops role
Hmm.
in the design systems team. And I would say 70+% of my effort over the last few years has been not about what the component should do, but more about what the people should do and how to collaborate. And so I think I've told you this before. My time at Envision felt much more like a design team therapist than a design systems
Yes.
consultant. And so a lot of it was like, well, have you talked to your product manager this month? Oh, like just those kind of like, oh, maybe we should go talk. Yeah, we've been so busy building this stuff. Maybe we should go talk to people.
Yeah.
And yeah, helping build out. I mean, I've got all kinds of graphics and decks and stuff I built around this, but like building those foundational layers of the systems piece. It's just like a funny word. Like we say design systems, and we spend so much time just designing components and not building the systems. And I'd
Yeah.
like to like nix the word and like make the systems the big word and the design piece really tiny. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
words matter.
yeah.
So I think this is a really good shift to the next topic that I wanted to talk about, and that is, um, I'll give you a little anecdote. So many years ago, I wrote a book called Design Sprints,
Mm.
and literally the moment that book was published, I started to regret calling it Design Sprints. Now, in my defense, I'd adopted that name from Google Ventures, who had made
Yeah.
the term very popular. I'd spoken to Jake Knapp about writing a book together. He was already writing his own book. And so we progressed forward with this design sprint book.
Nice.
The problem with the name design sprint was, of course, it had the word design and the word sprint in it.
Yep. Yep.
None of those things were helpful to us.
Okay.
A, because it really was nothing to do with design. I mean, it had big D design feelings to it, and sprint in the sense that it was a short amount of time, but it wasn't really applicable. And so the organization that I was running at the time found it very necessary to change that term from design sprint to whatever it was applicable in relationship to the organizations that we were working with. So if we were working with a very engineering focused company,
Yep.
we would literally change the name of design sprints to, discovery engineering or something like that.
Correct.
And what we've noticed with design systems is almost the same thing, is that
Correct.
it is a terrible name or a terrible burden to be carrying around with it, in the sense that,
Yeah.
yes, there are design elements in there and it speaks to design. And yes, it is a system, but it's really a product operations platform,
Correct.
right? That's probably the closest you could get to a description of what it's doing. And when you are making a case for a design system, you want to be very conscious of the fact that when you are pitching it to senior executives, when you're pitching it to decision makers, that you use the language of the organization,
Very
or
much.
at least show what value looks like outside of just that term design system. So instead of
Yeah.
saying, hey, here's the design system, you say, we have a way to increase the velocity of delivery. We're going to use this new product operations platform, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And use culturally relevant words. What does your vision statement say? What does your mission statement say? How could you adopt those language pieces into your organizational description of what it is you're doing? Really seeing a couple of things here, like user interface systems. Like, yeah, name it according to what's going
Right.
to resonate and
Yep.
what's going to land with your organization, and feel free to change it. Just
Yep.
because whoever decided to call it design systems doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Just because
No.
Dan Mall or Nathan Curtis are writing about design systems doesn't mean that's what you have to call it in your organization.
Right. Right. Yeah. And honestly, it's such a solid point. And I've had situations where I don't even call it a thing, right? Like
Right.
trying to label it sometimes immediately alienates folks. And I learned that lesson in a very hard way in my years at IBM, trying to roll out design thinking. It's just designers keep making
Yeah.
up terms and they keep naming stuff design things. And then we had a lot of engineers and they're like, this isn't relevant to me. And product managers are going, why are you teaching me about design thinking? It's a design thing. And we're like, no. And so we very quickly just abandoned the term completely and would just go in and say, how can we help your team, collaborate better and solve customer problems more consistently? And so, yeah, I think it works if the culture of the company is already adopted it and kind of has a general understanding of it. But man, if you're introducing it, you're trying to sell it and get people on board, you almost don't even need to name it. Just say what it's going to do, how it's going to help solve what problems. And then, oh, I can go Google design system conference or, design system resources and you get resources for it, but it doesn't have to be a publicly facing or internally publicly facing name in any way.
Totally. Yeah. I also want to talk a little bit about how the competitive power, this is just a term that I borrowed from,
Mm,
it's actually foundational power, if you will. But how does the power of a design system change over time? Because initially, making a handful of components, like we've heard from, I think you were at one of the events where, we've heard from some design systems consultants saying, look, really what you want to do is start with one or two or
yeah,
three components, just going
yeah,
to give the team an idea of just how powerful these things are. And then it's a little bit like, a gateway drug in the sense that once you've started
yeah,
using it, you're like, well, I can't go back. Like, this is
right.
too good to be true. I don't ever want to go back into a world where I don't have those components. But the way that you're going to be making a case for the scalability
Yeah.
of a design system is also going to change. What you start with initially might really require very little buy-in. But
Yeah.
as you start investing more and more time, you're going to need more resources. Let's talk a little bit about those changes. So one of the things is the network effect, right? The more people that are using it, the more likely there are people who are going to use it, right? That's just like the nature of networks is as you start introducing people. So tell me a little bit about you talked about lobbying and kind of the groundwork that you do. How do you go about getting more people into that network of users or consumers of the product itself?
Yeah. Two things. One, and I've only ever seen a successful a design system that feels successful. I don't think it's always measured well, but there's teams that go, oh, that worked or didn't
Mm,
work. I've only ever seen successful in the eyes of the creators of a design system, when it's launched on the heels of or hitched to another initiative within the company.
okay.
Like
So it's not a standalone project. It serves a greater good.
it serves a greater
Yeah.
good, right? And I'm always my sensors are always on for, this is the biggest thing in our company for the next 5. Okay, that's the thing. That's what we're going to support. Like anything that is the new special launch thing that's coming. The designs, there's never been a time that the design system couldn't support that in some way, shape, or form.
I heard design systems are really good for AI. That's true, right?
Absolutely. They're good for
Yeah.
they're good for everything. Yes. If it's a tech company, design systems are good for it. Support it in some way. And so that's the first thing, is like find an initiative and tie yourself to
Mhm.
it. That can add a lot of complexity because you don't necessarily own that thing. But if you can get in with that team and show that team how you're going to support them and help accelerate them. And let's say you do have some staff. Let's say you've got 2 engineers and a designer or two, and they're already short on engineers and designers. Be like, hey, we're going to help build your components. We're going to help build that new
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
you're trying to do. That's a great way to build significant momentum, because then when people start realizing like, oh, your team's helping that thing, and then those sponsors were like, this was so much better because you were involved. Just be valuable, add value to those big things is a huge
Yeah.
metric, or not metric, but just
Yeah,
huge path there.
totally. My AI comment was a little tongue in cheek. Our mutual friend Emily Campbell, who we used to work with
Yep.
at InVision, she has actually done the work of going out and looking at what the UI product experience is,
Yeah.
and recognize that that is something that could be systematized as well,
Yeah.
and that what we were opening up in this new Pandora's box is that a whole bunch of very poorly designed products are coming out
Mhm.
of the engineering world, which is like, oh, we know how to make a
Yes.
context window. Here it is. And you're like, well, does it actually work? Does it
Right.
actually matter to the user? Does it actually connect to their workflow? So I think
Yeah.
that's an important thing.
I
We've
mean,
got a
that's
couple of
getting back to
questions
just
coming in.
like design, right? Like just
Yeah,
capital D design, not
big
anything
D design. Yeah,
specified.
exactly.
Right. Right.
A couple of questions. So I'm opening a consultancy in Mexico specialized in design systems. What should be the competitive advantage or value proposition to sell? Speaking more in business terms, I think this is really what we've been talking about, which is you've got to connect it to the bigger picture. You've got to connect it to what the big initiative is at your client, if you're a consultancy, and
Mhm.
the clients that are hiring you or looking at you to be hired. They're going to be asking questions like, why now? Why is this important? And you've got to be able to have a discovery process that connects your questions to their questions. Like, well, what is important to you? What is going on? Where is the money being spent? What are the customers at the end of that delivery cycle expecting from you? And if you've got a design system, sorry, if you've got a design consultancy or a design systems consultancy, you've got to have a discovery period, which
Yep.
allows you to connect to that bigger picture. If you can't get close to it, you're always going to be that kind of orphan child or that
Yeah.
redhead stepchild of the project.
It's interesting. I have run a consultancy in the design system space, and the challenge I encountered in that is trying to sell design systems as a thing to buy. I just don't. I've seen the folks, the buyers for that search term, or think I need to build a design system, tend to be the engineers that
Right.
know they need it, and they're looking for people to build components.
Yes.
I found that trying to sell the concept of design system at the earlier stages doesn't land. And it's much more about what you were saying is like, what's the problem they're trying to solve? We're going to bring a design lens to your company or systems perspective or an operations perspective into how to operationalize what you're trying to do across design and engineering. And guess what? We got this awesome tool over here called design systems that will help you do that. But I don't think leading as a design system as the headline, I just got very little response from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, you didn't miss the end of the conversation on North Star metrics. What I recommend you do, this is obviously a much bigger conversation. We could have a whole webinar just on North Star metrics or on North Star metric exercises. And that is, go and Google that term. John Cutler did an incredible job when he was, where was he at Amplitude, I think, when he wrote up an entire blog post, very detailed. There's some videos as well. You don't want to go too deep into the details of that if you're introducing it to your team. If you are a design systems team and you're looking for North Star metrics, there are ways to do this within an hour or two. The way that John Cutler has outlined it, that could be like a week of exercises. No need to go that deep. You can just start with something that says, hey, this is the approximate thing that we're going to measure. Yep. It is a non-vanity metric that everybody can buy into, that is a leading indicator that we can have faith in, that will actually lead us towards value. And that it's in itself should be enough for you to be able to go any further. Okay, what else? So one of the other things that I've noticed about design systems is that because of that network effect, because you're getting increasingly more and more people actively involved in that process, there is another thing that happens, and that's the switching cost changes, right? Yeah. Suddenly you go from, hey, this thing is a kind of nice to have, or a few people are using it, to suddenly, well, everybody has to use it, because the alternative is this kind of counter argument of, are you going to custom design everything? And one of the ways that I've learned to explain that to people is, would you go out and buy a car that was literally made one-off? In other words, a custom made car every single time you wanted a car? Or would you want the efficiencies and quality assurance of something that's got massive amounts of calibration, perfection, if you will, because it's been used over and over and over again, tested and tested and tested, right, and you know that that thing's going to work. I know that my, car that I buy from a factory has to work because it's gone through the mill of that. Right. Whereas the thing that was built in somebody's garage, I don't really want to trust that anymore.
Yeah. And Richard, there was a second part from earlier that ties into this, which is how to get people to move to the thing that you're building. This is the design system, the new updates. I found the best way for me has been both through the people route, like getting some folks that are become your advocates, but co-creating parts of it with a prominent team that has a lot of energy behind it, and getting them to be early adopters versus like rolling it out to everybody. And I think that's a common thing, or commonly known thing, but I keep hearing teams trying to be like, we're going to wait until to launch the whole design system and everyone will go consume it. I've had it where we stop being, as the design system team, the spokespeople for it, because it becomes the groundswell from these key teams that are rolling out the changes. Not only does everything look better and work better, and you can they can make their updates more quickly, they become the folks that are like, this is awesome, like you should totally use it. And then that network effects becomes the thing that people go, oh, I want that for my team too.
Right, internal advocacy. Yes. So I think that where that really resonates, of course, is that we've heard, and I heard this recently from a Fortune 10 company that had tried to build a design system in secret. In other words, they were going to have this big moment, you can think about it almost like a marketing moment, where it was going to be revealed to everybody that this design system was now available to the entire company. And it fell flat twice, right? They attempted that on 2 different occasions. On the third attempt, they were able to approach this from your perspective, which is, what if we tried to do this just one team at a time? And we started small. We did a lot of that collaborative work we spoke about earlier. We had a lot of the right conversations, a lot of one-on-ones. And once we developed that internal competency with that one team, we could also start to then get that team to become our own internal advocate, essentially a customer that was happy, that had a high CSAT score, and they'd say,
Yeah.
hey, we would like to go and advocate for other teams. In other words,
Right.
the team that was now bought in was actively sharing their work with other teams because of that network effect.
Yeah.
It made sense for them to bring in other teams because it made their jobs easier.
Yep.
And that kind of had this kind of ripple effect, but also a scalable effect in the sense that it's so much easier for the converted to go and convert somebody instead of you kind of proselytizing.
This was talked about on the San Francisco summit a month ago, where the Design System Summit, where we brought up, or someone brought up that they said, I've been part of design system teams where our team literally just goes and builds their stuff. Like, you want to use the design system, we're going to rebuild your stuff for you just to get that momentum. And it's like not sustainable and not scalable, but to get the initial kickstart of people, if you go, hey, we're going to throw some of our into all of our resources at you to help get this thing going, those teams are going to be like, hell yeah, let's do it. Like it really removes the barrier to entry there.
Yeah. We have another question and perfect timing. Okay, let's see. We're going through a number of hurdles at my org. We're wanting our leadership to invest in tooling for us, Knapsack surprise, and we want them to see the value of things are going better when they're already going pretty well, but it's a ton of work to maintain and collaborate. How do you slice and dice, and where do you need to invest? From Tina, I guess. So Nick, where do you spend your time? Because you've obviously got a limited number of hours in your day.
Yeah.
Where are you going to put the effort to get the best impact for that one thing or the two things that you're going to do each week?
I think I touched on this earlier. It's really probably 70 or 80% the building connections, building trust, getting teams on board. I think actually my experience here at Bill has been interesting. When I first joined, I think folks were assuming that I would just get super into the weeds on all the components and try to like put fires out and play whack-a-mole on the componentry. And I was like, I'm not. I'm going to get to know the people. And that's paid off in droves now being a year in. And so Tina, obviously I can't tell where you're at completely in your journey, but the slice and dice on investment, it's more of I think it's more of a people game, and building the models where the various teams could work together to build components together. We've moved philosophically away from a contribution model into a co-creation model. And that bit of a change has helped us dramatically, where we used to ask people, hey, if you want it, build it and send it to us, versus you want it, let's talk about it. We'll see if other people want it, and then we'll co-create that thing together. And we're still building that model out. We've had a couple of projects that do that. But that level of investment on coordinating and command and control, not command, but helping everyone come together and get work done together. And then, like you said, Richard, when we would bring those large teams of folks together or cross-functional and they have never talked together, it's interesting how many times it's happened, not just here, but in almost every company I've interacted with or consulted with, of like those designers and developers and product managers on individual teams not talking. So just by doing that work with them, helps them work better together. And it's like we're helping them bring the systems part of it. So Tina, if you've got opportunities to do that, that's a good use of time.
So that, I mean, you're a parent. I wonder if there's some kind of connection there in the sense that you can be the helicopter parent and do everything for them.
Yep.
But when you're actually giving the responsibility to those teams, to those contributors, to actually come up with some of the solutions, they're going to come up with maybe even better solutions, but they're also going to be learning the skill or the practice of making those things.
Right.
And maybe even feel a sense of ownership or authority involved in that process. Is that what you're saying? Or
absolutely. I mean, we're remodeling our layout and spacing and grid spacing and snapping and all that stuff right now. That project's being led by consumers of the design system. We're just kind of overseeing it. And those teams that are working on that have a deep sense of ownership on that. So we don't have to convince them to use it. They're the ones that are going to be the first early adopters, and they're sussing out all the niche edge use cases for it. And it's slower than if we had just like sat down, knocked out some spacing and stuff, and then thrown it at them. But the adoption is going to be significantly higher. The long tail game here is going to be way better than us just giving them stuff by doing it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think what we've heard, we've been running these webinars, we've been running in-person events for design, engineering, and product leaders for the last several months now, probably for the last year now. And what we've noticed is this constant theme which comes up, and that is slower gets you there faster.
Yes.
This weird paradox of take your time, let this thing evolve. Yes, it is a little bit harder for, raising children to let them kind of learn on their own, make the mistakes and kind of fall and get up.
Natural
Yes, it's going to take
consequences.
longer.
Yeah.
But the consequences of that are significant, because if you don't allow that to happen, there is going to be an almost impossible case of supporting them forever. They're always going to be stuck with, gee, you guys have always done this for us. You always pick us up when we fall down.
Right.
How come you aren't there when we really need you?
Yep.
I think this is the case that needs to be made, is that the business case is often put through this lens of, well, what's the benefit for us in the next quarter or the next year?
Right.
But you've also got to see it as, yes, there will be some benefits. That's why it's good to start small. And yes, some teams will benefit really, really well. But the reality is there's also this other case for, if we allow this thing to evolve on its own and to kind of get there where as it needs to, it's going to have a massive amount of sticking power. It's going to really, really be valuable to everybody, not just to the team that says it was going to be valuable.
Spot on. Yep. Well said.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. We're running out of time. Time for a little bit of timeshare at the end. Nick, are you hiring or anything? Do you need to tell anybody anything about Bill or the team that you're building there?
We're not hiring at the moment, but I think the neat thing about our situation is we're within a product org, so our design team is within the product org organization, and that's been a good fit so far. But the investment to the design, I appreciate the investment they've made in the design system. It's the big reason why I'm here. But we continue to see that. I think we should continue to show that value by a lot of the things we talked about today. And thanks Laura about the kid analogy. It's spot on. Yeah, not hiring right now, but I'll definitely let everyone know.
And if you're a user of Knapsack, you use it how?
So we are the big shift that Knapsack's allowed us to do, and I'm really excited about it, is have all of our usage/design guidance and code in the same spot. We had been a storybook and zero height shop for a long time. There's still some stuff floating in Confluence, and we're currently bringing stuff all into Knapsack right now. But the idea that engineers who now are going to jump into the documentation are seeing not just how does it work in code, but they're seeing the accessibility guidelines. They're seeing different usage examples. That's a huge piece. And it's been interesting to watch our engineers go, this is so cool to have this in one spot. And even as we're transitioning, right, like there's parts of our code that are still in Storybook, and that's fine. And we can just expose it right in Knapsack. So yeah, it's been a little bit of a dream come true, thinking about using a tool like this and using a platform like this for, I guess, almost 10 years now. It's nice to get to deploy it.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we were trying to do at InVision, right? We were trying to create this kind of a single viewport where you could have your design files, your code, your documentation. You'd be able to see it all in one place. Well, Knapsack is literally that solution. Where
I don't know if I ever told you this. I left IBM to join InVision to work on this mission
because of that.
Because of that, like, shared vision. And then when it kind of started crumbling, RIP, it was really, it was really a sad moment. So it's fun to be on this side of it now, on a team deploying it and getting to like actually do it hands-on. It's really, it's been amazing.
Our mutual friend Jeff just reminded us that he's the one who bought Knapsack to build back in 2019. Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Hope to run into you at the Wild Hair. Cool. So we're out of time. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you all. See ya. Bye.